The night should have been one of celebration. But I learned my place in my own son's story in the most humiliating way. While music floated through the Charleston evening, I found myself steered not toward the glowing reception, but into the kitchen. A cramped, overheated room where servers brushed past me with trays of oysters and champagne, treating me like I was just another piece of furniture in their way. Harper, my brand new daughter-in-law, swept in with her lace gown catching the light. Without even looking at me, she declared that the kitchen help could eat back here. She didn't need to say my name. Her meaning was clear. I was not a guest. I was not family. I was wallpaper. And Lucas, my only child, stood just a few feet away in the doorway. I saw him glance in my direction, saw him register what had happened. But he stayed with his friends, laughing, cufflinks gleaming, pretending not to notice, pretending I didn't matter. The sting was sharp, but the silence afterward cut even deeper. I sat at a tiny table wedged between carts of dirty plates and the swinging door that slammed every few seconds. My dress clung to me in the heat. My pearls suddenly felt like cheap glass, and the laughter from outside floated in as if from another world. I gripped the stem of my untouched champagne flute, and in that moment, a lifetime pressed down on me. All the years, all the sacrifices, all the nights I had carried us both, it all came rushing back. I thought of where it all began, and how every choice I made was for him. That memory rose up in me, uninvited but undeniable, pulling me back to the life I had built long before Harper ever entered the picture. When I sat in that overheated kitchen with the sound of laughter spilling in from the ballroom, my mind didn't just dwell on the sting of Harper's words. It wandered back, unspooling like old film, to the years when everything rested on my shoulders. I was only 38 when my husband died. One moment, I had a partner to lean on, and the next, I was left with a mortgage, a 4-year-old boy, and a silence in the house so heavy it felt like the walls themselves were grieving. There was no cushion, no inheritance waiting to soften the blow. Just me, a second-hand drafting lamp, and a degree in interior design I hadn't used in years. At night, when Lucas was asleep, I would clear the dining table of cereal bowls and spread out tracing paper. The hum of my old rotary phone became the soundtrack of our survival. I'd sketch blueprints under the glow of a single bulb, whispering to myself that these lines on paper could someday turn into something real, something that would carry us forward. Clients came slowly. A neighbor who wanted her porch enclosed. A cousin's friend who needed a facelift for his diner. I took every job I could, balancing invoices beside Lucas's coloring books, learning how to draft contracts while teaching him how to spell his name. He'd curl up on the couch, drifting off to the sound of me describing tile samples to suppliers. I never thought of those nights as lost time. They were building blocks, for both of us. Lucas used to call my leather portfolio Mom's magic folder. He believed that every time I closed it, money appeared for groceries. And in a way, he wasn't wrong. That folder meant bills could be paid, that we could keep the lights on, that his soccer fees wouldn't be skipped. By the time he was in high school, Hayes & Co. wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. We had a staff of 10, an office with windows overlooking the Ashley River, and our work in glossy magazines. Lucas would stop by after practice, mud still on his cleats, grinning as he pointed to the sketches pinned on the wall. I thought we were building it together, mother and son, partners in pride. When he was accepted into college, I cried, not from fear of letting him go, but from the joy of knowing he'd seen what resilience could build. Even now, I can still picture those evenings when we shared takeout at the drafting table, his homework scattered among my blueprints. He'd ask me if I was tired, and I'd smile through the exhaustion because the truth was, every sacrifice felt worth it. Every late night, every missed party, every moment of doubt, I bore them gladly, believing we were a team. But teams can dissolve quietly. Somewhere between those childhood nights and this wedding reception, I lost the boy who believed in Mom's magic folder. Somewhere, Harper slipped in and rewrote the narrative of who I was in his life. Sitting in that kitchen tonight, surrounded by strangers balancing trays of champagne, I felt the ache of that distance more than ever. The business that once bore my name now celebrated someone else. The son who once clung to me now looked past me as if I were no more than a shadow. I thought I had already lived through the hardest loss of my life when I buried my husband. But the slow erosion of a bond with your only child cuts in a different way, quiet, relentless, and invisible to everyone else. The slam of the kitchen door pulled me back to the present. A burst of laughter spilled in, sharper this time, and I knew the night had more to teach me. What came next would not just sting, it would burn. The noise of the reception swelled each time the kitchen door swung open. Laughter carried on a golden tide of champagne and string music. Then the door slammed again, leaving me in the dim glow of fluorescent bulbs, the clatter of plates, and the faint smell of bleach. That was when Harper's voice cut through, sharp and deliberate, pitched just loud enough for everyone to hear. She said the kitchen help could eat back here. Her words landed like a slap. She didn't glance at me, didn't acknowledge that I was sitting right there in my pale silk dress and my mother's pearls. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't family. I was dismissed, folded into the background like a discarded chair. The staff froze for a beat, eyes darting toward me before skittering away. They pretended to polish glasses, adjust trays, check their watches, anything to avoid witnessing the cruelty that had just been laid bare. Through the doorway, I caught a glimpse of Lucas. He was surrounded by a circle of men in tailored suits, cufflinks flashing as he adjusted his jacket. He had seen it. I knew he had. For a brief second, his eyes flickered in my direction. And then nothing. No word. No gesture. Not even the smallest acknowledgement. He turned back to his conversation, nodding as if nothing had happened. The champagne flute in my hand grew slick with condensation as I tightened my grip, willing myself not to tremble. My cheeks burned, though I forced my back straight. I had endured worse storms in my life, but never one that came from within my own family. Anger simmered low, hot and steady. It wasn't just about Harper's cruelty. It was about Lucas's silence. The little boy who once begged me to sit by his bedside after nightmares now stood by while his wife erased me in public. That betrayal cut deeper than anything Harper could say. Still, something in me stayed calm, almost calculating. This humiliation was only the surface. I had already seen hints of how far Harper's influence stretched, how easily Lucas allowed her to shape the narrative of our lives. Tonight was only the beginning, and I knew, with a clarity that startled even me, that I would not remain silent forever. I used to think Harper's ambition was a good sign. When she first entered our lives, she seemed genuinely interested in the business. She asked thoughtful questions, listened as I explained projects, and even offered to help with small tasks. I remember telling friends that maybe, just maybe, I had found a daughter-in-law who truly appreciated what I'd built. But looking back now, I see the pattern for what it was: calculated steps, each one drawing the spotlight away from me and fixing it squarely on her. The first change was subtle. A brochure went out advertising our signature wallpaper collection. Only the title no longer carried my name. Instead of the Hayes line, it was rebranded with a sleek, modern name that Harper had chosen. I brushed it off at the time, thinking it was a marketing experiment. After all, businesses evolve. But I noticed the photographs inside no longer included me. Where once there had been an image of me at a drafting table, or a portrait of Lucas and me together, there was now only Harper smiling, poised, the perfect face of the company. The exclusions spread quietly, like ivy climbing a wall. Invitations to the annual legacy brunch went out to board members, investors, even junior designers, but somehow never reached me. When I confronted Lucas gently about it, he insisted it was a simple oversight. I wanted to believe him. I told myself mistakes happen. But how many mistakes does it take before you realize it's deliberate? At industry events, Harper introduced herself as the driving force behind our success. Lucas would stand beside her, nodding proudly, as though the years I spent hunched over blueprints meant nothing. Sometimes I'd catch his eye, hoping for a flicker of acknowledgement, some small recognition of the foundation I had laid. Instead, his expression remained neutral, carefully blank. The shift wasn't only professional, it was personal. Sunday dinners I used to host became Harper's curated soirees, where the menu was meticulously planned to impress clients rather than comfort family. The pie recipes Lucas once begged me to bake were replaced with delicate French pastries ordered from upscale bakeries. And each time, Harper would flash that dazzling smile and say how important it was to modernize traditions. Piece by piece, she was rewriting history. My history. Our history. And Lucas let her. It's one thing to lose influence in a company boardroom. It's another to be erased in your own family. I had spent decades carving out a name not just for myself, but for us, for Lucas. For the future I believed we were building together. Now, my signature, my vision, my presence was being scrubbed away like chalk from a blackboard. The realization came slowly, but it landed with crushing weight. I had not simply been overlooked. I had been replaced. And yet, the worst betrayal wasn't Harper's hunger for power. It was Lucas's silence. He who had once sat beside me at the drafting table, eyes wide with admiration, now stood idle as my legacy was absorbed into Harper's. He allowed her to eclipse me completely, as though I were nothing more than a stepping stone in his new life. The pain of that truth settled deep inside me, heavier than anything I had carried before. I had shouldered grief, hardship, and loneliness, but the quiet erasure by my own child was something different. It stripped me bare. But pain, if you sit with it long enough, can harden into resolve. As the reception music swelled beyond the swinging kitchen door, I straightened in my chair. Harper could bask in the glow of her carefully staged triumph. Lucas could stand beside her in his polished cufflinks, pretending not to see me. Let them, because while they toasted their future, I was already planning mine. And unlike them, I knew how to build something from nothing. I had done it once. I could do it again. Only this time, I wasn't building, I was dismantling. The sting of Harper's words still echoed in my chest. But the longer I sat in that cramped kitchen, the quieter my pulse became. My anger cooled into something sharper, steadier, like a blade honed in silence. The champagne flute on the table sweated in the heat, a droplet sliding down the glass and pooling beneath the stem. I set it aside untouched. My hand reached instead for the small clutch resting in my lap. Inside was my phone, its weight familiar and grounding. For years, that phone had been my lifeline where clients called at midnight, where contracts were signed, where the company was steered through storms. It was, in many ways, the last reminder of the authority I still carried. Even if Lucas and Harper pretended otherwise. I pressed one number. My most trusted associate answered on the second ring. I didn't waste words. I didn't need to. My voice came out calm, almost gentle, as I gave the instruction cancel the $28 million real estate deal Lucas was set to announce that night. There was a silence on the other end, a quick intake of breath, then a simple reply understood. And just like that, the glittering future Harper and Lucas were parading outside dimmed. The deal that would have crowned their night collapsed with a few quiet syllables spoken from the shadows of a kitchen. I slid the phone back into my clutch and leaned against the chair. Outside, the string quartet played a cheerful tune as guests lifted their glasses in celebration, oblivious to the shift that had just taken place. They toasted to a legacy they thought was theirs, unaware that I had just pulled the ground out from beneath it. There was no dramatic outburst, no public confrontation. That wasn't my way. My power had never been about spectacle. It was about endurance, about knowing when to move, when to strike, and when silence was the sharpest weapon of all. As I sat there, the satisfaction settled over me, not a giddy thrill, but a quiet certainty. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one being erased. I was the one writing the next line. And as I thought back on the full story, the sacrifices, the devotion, the years poured into both Lucas and the business, I understood just how deep the betrayal ran. This was no longer about hurt feelings at a wedding. It was about reclaiming what was mine. The music outside swelled again. Another toast, punctuated with laughter. But I barely heard it. My mind was caught in a storm of memory moments strung together, like beads on a thread that had now been cut, scattering everything I once held dear. I thought of the first office I rented, a converted storage unit with water stains on the ceiling and a heater that rattled like a freight train. Lucas was 10 then. He'd sit at a desk too big for him, swinging his legs as he tackled math homework while I drafted layouts for a client who could barely afford me. He'd bring me his drawings, wobbly lines, and stick figures and say he wanted to design buildings like me one day. I kept those papers for years, folded neatly in a file marked Dreams. Then came the lean years, when the economy dipped and contracts dried up. I remember pawning my grandmother's locket to make payroll for the team, determined that none of them would go unpaid for my failings. I cooked beans and rice for weeks to stretch the grocery budget. But Lucas never knew hunger. He never knew the worry that gnawed at me every night, praying the phone would ring with new work. Later, when success finally arrived, it was brighter than I had imagined. Our projects filled glossy magazines. Our designs shaped neighborhoods. I remember walking with Lucas through one of our completed homes, sunlight slanting across hardwood floors, and he whispered that he was proud of me. I carried those words in my chest like a secret talisman, proof that all the sacrifices had mattered. And now, all of that, every locket pawned, every sleepless night, every ounce of my love and labor had been written out of the story. replaced by Harper's polished smile and Lucas's silent approval. They had scrubbed my name off the masthead, erased my face from the brochures, deleted me from the history I had built with my own hands. Harper had positioned herself as the visionary, the architect of success, and Lucas had let her. My son, the boy who once believed my portfolio held magic, now pretended my role was nothing more than a footnote. The heartbreak was unbearable, a weight that pressed against my ribs until I could scarcely breathe. To be cast aside by strangers is one thing, but to be erased by your own child, that is a wound with no clean edges, a cut that bleeds from the soul. I wanted to rage, to stand in the middle of that glittering ballroom and scream the truth until every guest understood the theft that had taken place. But instead, I sat still, because grief had taught me long ago that storms are not always survived by shouting into the wind. Sometimes, they're endured in silence until the sky clears and then you move. The pain twisted into anger, the anger into clarity. I realized this was not just about me being pushed aside at a wedding. This was about my entire life being rewritten without me, and I would not allow that. My heart broke as I watched the boy I raised, now a man, stand tall beside a woman who had dismantled everything I had given him. But with that heartbreak came resolve. I would not fade quietly into their version of history. I had already pulled one string tonight, and I still held the power to pull many more. The night carried on as though nothing had shifted, but I knew better. Out in the ballroom, Harper's laugh rang high and clear, a triumphant note in the music of her own performance. Guests leaned in close, admiring her as if she had orchestrated everything. Lucas stood at her side, his expression polished, his arm around her waist. But beneath all that glitter, the ground had already shifted. They didn't know it yet, but their empire had cracked the moment I made that phone call. Deals fall apart quietly at first, a contract unsigned, an investor pulling back, a rumor slipping through boardroom halls. By morning, the story they had rehearsed so carefully would begin to unravel, thread by thread. I didn't need applause or a public scene. My power was not in their approval, but in my endurance. I had built this legacy once before, from scraps and stubbornness, and I still knew every foundation, every weakness, every lever to pull. That was something Harper could never fake, no matter how many glossy brochures carried her name. Sitting in the shadows of that kitchen, I felt no defeat. I felt calm, steady. For the first time in years, I wasn't the forgotten woman in the corner. I was the one pulling strings. And the beauty of it was this: they wouldn't see it coming until it was far too late. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of theirs unraveling. In the end, I realized dignity isn't something others grant you, it's something you decide to keep, even when others try to strip it away. My legacy was never meant to be handed over to those who saw it as a trophy. It was built from love, sacrifice, and resilience, and no one can erase that truth but me. If you've ever felt dismissed by the very people you gave everything to, know this: you are not powerless. Your story is still yours to write. Share your thoughts below, because I know I'm not the only one with scars like these.